And today, once again, we return with Michael Cranford. Now, Michael's an artist, a painter, and he designs bio-inspired homes. He's offering Fibonacci retreats in the rainforest of Costa Rica. Rainforest is teacher or biomimicry 101, and I thought last week did a pretty fabulous job of getting us oriented to what we can learn about Fibonacci in nature. We're going to pick up where we left off last week by beginning to talk about some health-related aspects. Fascinating, because we know that when we go to have blood work, most people don't, I know, when you go to have blood work, they're really not looking at the health of the blood at all. What they're trying to identify is a diagnosis. Is there something so far out of the sphere of what's considered normal that they can, provide you with a diagnosis? They're not looking necessarily at the shape and the form and the, agglutination or the coagulation of the blood unless there's advanced testing. They take, numbers, limits on numbers, and this is pooled from people who actually go and get their blood drawn and not necessarily from healthy populations. And Michael, you made the point that actually with the way the blood is obtained and then evaluated or analyzed, that we probably don't even really know what healthy blood looks like.
I really don't think so. I mean, if you think of the textures and the forms that are inside our veins and our arteries, and you look at the smooth running cylindrical shape of our needles and our dialysis equipment, and also our tubing that we run our plasma through to drain the blood and to reoxidize the blood. And so if you think of the shapes and form to function, and I'm going to be mentioning that word form to function many times throughout this series, the veins have a certain texture about them that are very similar to a river or very similar to a canyon. Fibonacci exists in our veins, it exists in the way blood flows, and it exists in water and air, sound and fire. So we really need to look at how we treat people and how we analyze healthy or sick people, and really make some adaptations that are based on copying nature. To me, it's common sense, has been for a few years, but to communicate this subject in a way that people can understand where Fibonacci is, what it is, and how we can find it, and how we can use it, and more importantly, how we can apply it to our lives to live healthy.
Right. You've got several things to share with us today from the notes that you sent over to me. I think this is going to be a fabulous show because it really does get down to how we can begin to incorporate this into our homes and our lives. This is not just theoretical.
Well, take a look at how pipes oxidized, how pipes oxidize underneath your home, and if you go in to try to clean out your pipes at some point, it's a very bubbleless surface. It's textured. It looks very similar to what reptile skin would look like or scales on a fish. It's textured, and so water corrects itself. It has memory, just like plants have memory, and both water and blood and sap, when they're running through these channels, they move in a cross vortice like eddy pattern, a whirlwind, as we say, based on the Fibonacci sequence. And this sequence is the creation of all life. I travel all over Central America designing homes for people, and I first start by analyzing the home site, northeast, southwest, where the breeze, where the hot air comes from, where the cool air comes from. And then depending on the circumstances, I try to design those homes to attract cool air, ozone, O3, and repel warm, hot afternoon sun to keep you comfortable, in your living room in the areas that you use the most. So I take into consider all of these things in my designs, with my deck railings being shaped like humpback whale dorsal fins, trying to round off windows and to try to spin the air through the house in an oxygenated way that provides free cooling that allows me to turn my fan off as well. So I do this in my architectural practice, but now it's drifting off and explaining Fibonacci and oxygenated air techniques that can help things. You have to look at nature and see how nature processes this.
Right.
So one of the examples, there's lots of examples. Zebras, the stripation and the stripes of zebras actually create a convection current for the zebras or a giraffe or any striped animal. So this place where black meets white and warm air rubs against cold air, at each cross-section of the stripation on a zebra, it actually creates air conditioning for the animal. So my question is, why aren't the roofs of our houses painted like this?
Right.
Why isn't our insulations that we put in our walls designed around nature?
Right.
So these are some of the questions that I ask when I stare out at my monkeys and my toucans and watching a spider web for 4 years build a nest. Well, they have wintertime requirements too, and they build their nests and their webs in their opposite direction that they do in the summer. The winter they want to hide and protect themselves from the wind and the rain, and in the summer they want to eat. So nature pretty much has all the answers.
Just by examining it. Well, what is the phenomenon with penguins? Because they're sometimes in -40 degree temperatures.
Okay, we'll get going on the penguins. Well, in my research of studying Fibonacci, I have to say to myself, how do these species live at the bottom of the ocean? How do they live at the top of Everest? How do small plants survive at 23,000 feet? And so I start looking at nature, and I think of the most extreme examples. Well, emperor penguins are one of the most extreme examples that I can think of, where they live in 50-degree below zero weather with 40-mile-an-hour headwinds, which puts the air temperature near their bodies at almost 90 degrees below zero. So how do they do it? They've got to figure out. They don't even have their women around. For the most part, what the penguins do is they align themselves, their oval-shaped aerodynamic bodies, along with their heartbeats, all beating intuitively as one organism, just like an aspen tree or just like the clouds in a hurricane. So in many ways, the penguins create a form that replicates a hurricane. Now, this is the fascinating part. We all know that they move in little movements that are all kind of, but at the same time, when viewed from above, there's an organized double vortice pattern that can be observed. This is Fibonacci. The combined penguins huddling in a spiral formation create a sort of pump or a heat-generating device. Their tiny heartbeats and their body temperatures are carried inward towards the middle of the huddle, or the eye of the hurricane, gaining velocity as it bounces off each of their bodies and creates oxygenated air, which heats up. So each time as the air passes their bodies, it heats up as it heads towards the middle of the huddle. But that's not where the heat actually begins. That's just accepting the cold air into the pump. The real energy happens as the air starts heading back out through the double vortex, back outwards and redistributed through the huddle of emperor penguins. Now, the temperature on the outside is 90 degrees below zero, 50 degrees without the wind, below zero, but the temperature on the inside of the huddle is over 100 degrees, a temperature difference of almost 160 degrees in less than 100 feet. So this is amazing to me, but it really isn't that amazing, because if you think of getting stuck in an avalanche with 9 of your friends and you're under the snow all night, you're going to huddle together to create energy.
Right.
So it's not rocket science, but it requires a different way of thinking. And so if you think of penguins duplicating the shapes of clouds in a hurricane in order to create energy, then we as humans should be able to do the same thing if we can get out from under the treadmill.
Right. Now, that is fascinating. I didn't know the complete story of that. I'm sitting here saying to myself, wow, a temperature difference of 160 degrees and 100 feet. Now, you mentioned something else that's relevant. You mentioned that intuitively their hearts are beating as one organism. And there's been a lot of work done with what's called, heart coherence, that when things are in flow, working together. right? And this produces a type of synergy. So another thought that I have just in terms of health is, you can learn to get your heart into a coherent space. Most of us, when you talk about the treadmill, most of us are running on sympathetic nervous system function all the time. And so we don't, we're in that fight or flight mode. We don't even know it because we're so used to being there. And we're not into the rest, digest, and repair mode, which is parasympathetic. And there's been an astonishing amount of research done on how heart coherence, what we call heart rate variability, really, again, imbues the body with health, but also affects people around you. In other words, if you can create a coherent heart space within yourself, you have a positive effect on others. They will intuitively or naturally, their hearts will move into a likewise more synchronized, more coherent flow. Left off with Michael talking about his observations of termites and ants and bees and, insects and what they're building and how they're building. And we made the comment that we agreed upon the fact that we're doing everything backwards and wrong, from the way we plow our soil to the way we heat, beat, and treat water, to the way we design our homes, without any comprehension for how form really affects the quality of the energy in our space. You sound ready and raring to go. I have a picture of the Costa Rica treehouse up here on my desktop, and I'm just looking at the phenomenal photographs you have of your treehouse. And listeners, Michael has learned what he knows today about Fibonacci by, studying it, but living in the rainforest of Costa Rica, designing his own home and his own energy needs for this home in accordance with the forms and the functions that are found in nature. Again, say that, there are researchers, I'm just going to say it again and again, because the work that's being done just with water, and quantum coherent organisms. When you're talking about the penguins, this is a quantum coherent organism. It's basically utilizing, like you said, orgone, or this life force energy, if you will, to acquire what we think of as great feats. And yet, if we look at nature, we realize that great feats are just a part of nature, our world. Hey, Michael, thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful day. Listeners, I hope you likewise have a beautiful day. Michael will be with us again next Monday. We have several shows lined up with him, helping us to understand how to reconnect with nature for health and wealth.